And a new report by human rights defenders has indicted Kenyan authorities for committing a range of abuses against journalists reporting on sensitive issues, threatening freedom of expression ahead of the elections slated for the 8th of August this year. Human Rights Watch and Article 19 Eastern Africa said in a report released today that journalists and bloggers reporting on corruption, disputed land acquisition, counter-terrorism operations, and the 2007-2008 post-election violence, among other sensitive issues, have faced intimidation, beatings, and job loss. The 53-page report, not worth the risk, threats to free expression ahead of Kenya's 2017 elections, documents abuses by government officials, police, county governors, and other government officials against the media. Human Rights Watch and Article 19 examined government attempts to obstruct critical journalists and bloggers with legal, administrative, and informal measures, including threats, intimidation, harassment, online and phone surveillance, and in some cases, physical assaults. Here with me on set now to expound more on the report findings in the Kenya researcher is a Kenya researcher for Human Rights Watch, Mr. Otsieno Namwaya. Thank you, sir, for joining us on the show this afternoon. Just how bad is the situation according to the findings by the report by Article 19 and Human Rights Watch? It is 69 days to the elections. How bad is it?
Ben, we did conduct research across the country and we went to several counties.
Right.
And of the cases that we documented, we are talking about 23 cases of physical attacks and 16 cases of threats, death threats, we can say them, and another 14 cases where we find that either journalists or bloggers have been arrested and then released without charge, in some cases indicating that this could just be acts of intimidation by the state. So that is how bad it is. But I have to mention that these are just cases that we documented. The situation is probably worse than that, but even that is bad enough.
According to your findings, who are the main orchestrators of these assaults?
In some cases, and what is more worrying is that some of the attacks are by police officers, and in other cases by individuals who are not necessarily security officers, but there were indications that they have a certain relationship with individuals in either the national government or the county government. So there is a level of state involvement of some sorts. So mainly those were the main perpetrators. But the main thing is that even where the attacks were not by police officers, when these cases were reported to police officers, the police didn't take any action. They didn't seem to be concerned. So there were no investigations and there were no prosecutions. There have been no prosecutions.
In your opinion, is there any correlation between these cases and the fact that it is the run-up to the elections? It is an electioneering period. Is there any correlation, or what is the impact of what you have found out and the fact that it is just less than hardly 2 months to the elections?
Like you mentioned, the journalists that we found, most of the attacks we found are for people who report on the sensitive subjects. And these sensitive subjects include the land issues, issues around corruption, issues around security sector, and even issues relating to political parties and how they conduct their affairs. So these are key issues heading into the elections, and these are issues that are going to shape the debate of the country ahead of the elections. And people need to be informed fairly enough to be able to make a decision. The media needs also to have the freedom to report on these issues. So the impact of this kind of attacks is that the media is not going to be free to report freely on these issues if these attacks continue.
Have there been any deaths from your findings?
Yes, we did document at least 2 deaths. There could be probably more, but we did document 2 deaths, one in Eldoret and another one in Kitale. And these were deaths that were specifically of cases that we thought could have links to the journalist's work, not deaths of other issues. So, yeah, to that extent, yes.
All right, and what would you say should be the next, point of action, given that this has indicted even the states? What can be done, and can anything be done by the government?
Yes, of course, the onus is on the state. The first responsibility is, of course, for the police to begin to take these cases seriously. When reports are made, they need to be investigated, and eventually we need to know who was behind them, and those who are responsible should be held to account. That's the first step. But also we need some level of political accountability, and people begin to take responsibilities, and that's why we think that some statements from the political leadership condemning these kind of attacks or threats against the media, the bloggers, need to begin to happen before the elections.
All right.
Yeah.
In your analysis, I mean, the media reports on all kinds of these issues with what's happening in terms of the sensitive issues, as you mentioned, fighting for people, the voiceless, being the voice of the voiceless, so to speak. Is anybody fighting for journalists?
Unfortunately, one of the things that we found is, of course, that whenever these things happen, if you look at the title of our report, is that it's not worth the risk, because journalists think that they do so much, they commit their lives, they sacrifice a lot, but then when things happen to them, nobody seems to care. But the main person who doesn't seem to care, or the main institution who should be caring, is the police and other state agencies. I have to mention, though, that in the course of our work, we did come across a few cases which have been taken up by IPOA. And IPOA is working on this. But those are just a few cases. We don't know how they will go. We hope that probably they'll end up in prosecutions. But most of these cases have gone uninvestigated. They have gone unprosecuted.
Have you engaged any of those, maybe the police, any arms of the state on these findings?
When we were doing the research, we did talk to the police. We were in communication with the Office of the Inspector General, and he did respond to us. We did write to him. We did enumerate some of the cases to him. And the communications director, George Kinoti, did respond to us. However, they were saying that of all these allegations, they were saying that if these cases don't get investigated, journalists need to escalate them to the level of the IGP. But that's, again, problematic because not all journalists have access to the IGP. And the second one is that when you talk to the unions, the Kenya Union of Journalists and the Kenya Correspondents Association, they tell you that they have written letters to the IGP raising concerns about these issues, and those letters have not been responded to more than a year later. So that begins to look like a big problem. That is how the situation is.
In your analysis, which journalists face the biggest risks?
Like we said, the journalists who focus on those kind of subjects, but there is also a variation. Nairobi seems to have a high number of journalists who are being attacked, but in terms of vulnerability, we thought that journalists at the county level are more vulnerable because they don't know where to go once the attacks happen, and secondly, they are not in the limelight. So when these things happen, it does not immediately come to the public attention. So those who are more vulnerable are those journalists in the other counties.
Do you think anything will be done between now and the elections and even beyond?
That's what we are hoping for, because it is the responsibility of the state to ensure that freedom of expression is protected. All right.
Okay. Thank you so much
for
your insights. That is, of course, Otsieno Namwaya from Human Rights Watch following that report about journalists in this country facing a lot of danger even in the run-up to this year's election, especially those journalists that have been focusing or reporting on the sensitive issues ahead of the election. Thank you so much. Great.